32. I was confessed to. Ist, the deputy director of the Court Magic Bureau, was a different kind of genius from Aresh. His intellectual curiosity regarding magic was extraordinarily high, he possessed many compatible attributes, and he was undeniably talented. But in all other areas, he was utterly hopeless. Unlike Aresh, he hadn't been born into nobility, but into a merchant family. Yet he was incapable of handling finances or social maneuvering. He could barely manage daily life. Communication with others was especially difficult for him. His parents had constantly worried about him, but fortunately his magical talent had been recognized. With the backing of a viscount family friendly to them, he smoothly secured employment in the Court Magic Bureau after graduating from Magic Academy. Even after joining the Bureau, he caused various problems, but his results outweighed them, so despite complaints, he led a fulfilling life. Ist loved magical research as a whole. He had even played a role in reviving the Saintess summoning ritual, because he had been personally researching the principles and effects of ancient, now-lost magic. Thus, the Saintess was summoned from another world, and with his intellectual curiosity satisfied, Ist's interest shifted to the demon forest. And now, at the inn on the way back from the first purification expedition to the demon forest, before his eyes were, on one side, the young, celebrated commander of the Third Knight Order. On the otherworlder dragged here as collateral damage of the Saintess summoning. Half-naked, overlapping on a bed. Ist tilted his head. We're busy. Leave. Even when Aresh spoke in a low voice that carried a chill, Ist's mind was elsewhere. The one pinned beneath him, Kondu, Deputy Accounting Administrator and Otherworlder, had, if he remembered correctly, been merely caught up in the summoning. Unlike the Saintess, he had no tolerance for this world. He had felt something off since the banquet. He'd assumed it was because Aresh was beside him. But no, at first Aresh hadn't been there. Later he had met Kondu alone. The sensation hadn't changed. Kondu always carried Aresh's magical presence. It wasn't that their magical tendencies were similar. Kondu couldn't use magic, which meant he had been dyed in Aresh's magic. Once that clicked, Ist nodded several times. Hey, don't run. Saikaira, who had tried to slip out from beneath Aresh while Ist stood there staring and nodding ominously, was caught and pinned by the shoulder. No, this is the only reasonable reaction here. Let's reset the situation, Aresh-sama. No, you'll just talk your way out of it again. He had fully intended to seize the advantage if they reset. But frankly, Aresh confronting Ist from atop him like this was far stranger. Before he could maneuver them into a more decent posture, Saikaira turned toward Ist, hoping to at least get him to close the door, only to find Ist's eyes more open than usual. Bright, sparkling with amusement. Can I stay and watch? And so, you see, someone without magical resistance is extremely rare in this world. Practically only newborn infants. But infants are small, so they rarely come into contact with magic, and acclimating them is easy. Kondu, however, is an adult with zero resistance, yet he's endured high-level barrier magic, acclimated to a single person's magical signature. From a magical theory standpoint, this is extremely rare. Kondu constantly emits the magical oscillation of Commander Indrak, both internally and externally. And since Kondu lacks what you might call a magical core organ, it's circulating internally only. This had been going on for over 2 hours now, in the carriage on the return journey. Researchers, once they found something interesting, tended to lose sight of everything else. Saikaira mentally shelved any self-reflection and listened with the posture of a papier-mâché tiger, while Ist's lecture gradually lost both honorifics and breathing breaks. After considerable chaos, Saikaira had managed to kick both Aresh and Ist out of the room. Now that they were in an area where the miasma was thinner and the barrier had already been reapplied, he had refused to ride with Aresh, citing the need to organize documents for post-expedition submission, and instead joined the court mage's carriage. Magical circulation is the organ that distributes magic through the body, but Kondu doesn't have that, so I hypothesize an alternative mechanism has activated, and that must be. Some fragments were fascinating, but Saikaira was busy. Once they returned to the palace, he had to report to Chancellor Camille. Immediately afterward, he would surely be summoned by the first prince. He needed documentation ready to explain everything, and letters prepared for other parties. Those would be sent ahead by fast horse at the next town, so they took priority. Thus he let Ist's rapid-fire lecture pass from one ear to the other, nodding occasionally while his gaze remained on his paperwork. A magical pen moved across the page. His other hand flicked an abacus. The mages in the carriage had initially watched Ist's explanation with interest, and then turned their gaze to Saikaira with something closer to awe. But his hands never stopped. There was too much to do. If he didn't act immediately after this expedition, his proposal wouldn't pass. He needed multiple collaborators. He needed groundwork. This was the decisive moment. At the First Lord's manor where they had stayed, thinking about tomorrow's return to the capital, Saikaira performed a final review of his documents. The express courier had already been sent. The materials were prepared, even if not immediately demanded. He still needed to align positions with the Chancellor and his collaborators, but they were competent. Ist would be somewhat troublesome, but he was honest to his desires. Dangle bait, and he'd give verbal commitment on impulse. Zoltarn would need to be present as a witness. Still awake? Is knocking not customary in this country? He had assumed Ist was simply rude, but if even the Marquis-born Aresh behaved this way, perhaps it was national etiquette. I knocked. You just didn't notice. Saikaira half-lidded his eyes but swallowed his sigh. After only one day apart, the Knight Commander had been in a sour mood since dinner. Aresh-sama, tomorrow we return to the capital. I've received direct instructions from the Chancellor, so I must report, and also compile my regular accounting duties. I know. Yet as he said it, Aresh pulled him toward the bed. You're done preparing for tomorrow. If you'll be even busier from tomorrow onward, you'll need a barrier, won't you? Saikaira blinked at the unexpected consideration. Lately Aresh had even started handling paperwork, but his actions before the expedition had felt impulsive, almost childish, out of concern for Saikaira's health. This surprised him. It was true that once back in the capital, Saikaira would be overwhelmed. Aresh too would be busy. Frankly, the fact that an overworked accounting deputy and the Third Night Order's commander met every day was unreasonable to begin with. But this body, lacking tolerance for mana and miasma, could not function without Aresh's goodwill. Because this was the decisive moment, he couldn't afford to collapse now. Thank you. Perhaps sensing his tension easing, Aresh murmured the sung incantation and then pressed his lips to Saikaira's. FMM. As their lips met again and again, as large hands traced directly over his skin, Saikaira let himself sink into it and thought through a fevered haze. Without this man, good lineage, talent, status, beauty, he would already be dead. Twice he had been saved. In countless other ways, too, things would not have functioned without him. Right now there were too many priorities to face Aresh's feelings. But when this was over, he would have to. Hey! Perhaps thinking Saikaira's mind had wandered, Aresh spoke. Yes. Opening his eyes, he found violet ones clouded with desire looking down at him. Ah, perhaps he should do something. Saikaira moved a slightly sluggish hand toward Aresh's center, but Aresh stopped it. Aresh-sama? Tilting his head, wondering why he was being stopped, he met unexpectedly serious eyes. I have no intention of handing responsibility for you over to anyone else.